Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Soul Stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Stay with us, because a new love story is about to begin. The first thing Evelyn Carter heard when the train slowed was the long, lonely whistle, stretching across the empty Wyoming land like a cry for help. The dust, the wind, the scorching sun, everything about this new place felt strange. She held her small wooden trunk tighter and stepped down onto the platform of Dust Creek, praying the man she came to marry would be kind. But the first man who rushed toward her was not kind at all. He was big, drunk, and smiling like he owned her already. His boots kicked up clouds of dirt as he approached, and the smell of whiskey reached her before his shadow did. "Well now," he boomed, "you must be the bride for J. Cole. That's me, Jasper Cole. Preacher's waiting. Let's go." Evelyn froze. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs wide open. This couldn't be the man. She had imagined someone gentle, someone decent, someone who wrote letters about building a life together, about partnership and respect. But Jasper's eyes were hungry and cruel, sliding over her like she was something he had purchased at auction. "I have a letter," Evelyn whispered, reaching toward her satchel with trembling fingers. "Don't need no letter," Jasper said, stepping forward to grab her arm with thick, calloused fingers that bit into her flesh. "You belong to me now." She stumbled backward, hitting a stack of wooden crates as laughter echoed from the men lounging behind him. They wore the same drunk grins, the same predatory amusement. Townfolks stared from doorways and porches but did nothing. Dust Creek was the kind of place where trouble was watched, not stopped, where people minded their own survival and left others to theirs. Evelyn felt trapped. She was only 18 years old, sent west because her aunt couldn't feed another mouth anymore, sold off like unwanted furniture to a man she had never met. And now this brute, this monster with whiskey on his breath and cruelty in his eyes, was about to drag her away to a fate she couldn't bear to imagine. Then a calm voice cut through the noise like a blade through rope. "That's enough, Jasper." The crowd shifted. A taller man stepped forward from the shadows of the general store, moving with steady confidence that seemed to part the onlookers like water around stone. His face was sun-hardened and weathered by years of wind and work. His gray eyes were sharp as flint, taking in the scene with quiet assessment. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply existed, like a wall you couldn't push through, like a mountain that had always been there and would remain long after everything else crumbled to dust. His name was Jonah Cole, and he shared Jasper's last name, though nothing else about them seemed alike. Jasper sneered, his grip tightening on Evelyn's arm. "Stay out of this, Jonah. This girl's mine fair and square." "The lady doesn't look willing," Jonah said quietly, placing himself between them with a single measured step. His voice carried no anger, only certainty. Evelyn looked up at him, desperate and searching. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't soft. But something about him felt safe, like the mountains in the distance that she had watched through the train window for hours, strong, steady, impossible to move. The kind of thing you could build a shelter against. Jasper shoved Jonah's shoulder hard. "The telegraph said bride for J. Cole." "That's me, plain as day." The post office clerk came running out, waving the message in his ink-stained hands. "It's true," he squeaked nervously. "It only says J. Cole. No first name specified." A murmur swept through the gathered crowd like wind through tall grass. This was becoming entertainment for them, Evelyn realized. Her future was their afternoon amusement. Jasper grabbed for her arm again, and something inside Evelyn finally cracked open. Not fear this time. Anger. "What was my name in the advertisement?" she demanded, her voice trembling but fierce. "What town did my aunt write from? Tell me, if you wrote those letters you would know." Jasper froze. His drunk smile flickered and died. He didn't know. He hadn't written a single letter with respect or care. He had only sent crude postcards filled with demands and expectations. Cards she hadn't dared show anyone, cards that had made her weep with dread on the long journey west. Jonah saw his chance. He turned to Evelyn and his voice softened. Not much, but enough. Just enough to feel like shelter. "I believe you're here for me," he said. "I'm Jonah Cole. I'm the one who placed the advertisement. If you'll allow it, I'll get you off this platform and somewhere safe." He held out his hand, strong, scarred, steady, the hand of a man who worked the land and kept his word. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, while her entire future balanced on the edge of a single choice. Then she placed her trembling hand in his. A gasp moved through the crowd like a ripple across still water. Jasper roared with fury. "She's mine, you hear me? Mine." Deputy Knox finally stepped in from where he had been watching with lazy interest, scratching his considerable stomach. "Now settle down, Jasper." Lady picked her man. Nothing more to discuss here. Jonah didn't argue or gloat. He simply picked up Evelyn's small wooden trunk with one hand and kept her close with the other as he led her away from the saloon, away from Jasper's shouting, away from the danger that had almost swallowed her whole. Her entire life had changed in seconds, pivoting on a single moment of courage and a stranger's outstretched hand. He helped her into his wagon, climbing up beside her with the easy movement of a man who had done this 10,000 times. He clicked the reins, and the horses began to move. The wind whipped her dress as Dust Creek shrank behind them, becoming smaller and smaller until it was just a smudge of buildings against the endless horizon. They rode in silence through miles of open land, the sky wide and endless above them like an ocean turned upside down. Evelyn watched the horizon, her mind spinning with fear and confusion and something else she couldn't name. She didn't know this man. She didn't know this place. All she knew was that she had been claimed publicly, loudly, and there was no undoing it now. When they reached his ranch at sunset, the light painting everything gold and amber, Jonah finally spoke. "My word is my bond," he said quietly, not looking at her. "What happened today wasn't planned. I didn't expect Jasper to cause such trouble, but I'll keep you safe, and I won't make you do anything you don't want to do. You have my word on that." He showed her a small room at the back of the house, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin and a small mirror, a window looking out at the cottonwood trees that swayed gently in the evening breeze. It was more space, more privacy, more ownership than she had ever had in her entire life. "You're safe here," he added before closing the door. For the first time since stepping off that train, she believed it. But fear still sat heavy in her heart like a stone she couldn't dislodge. Not fear of Jonah anymore. Fear of the mistake that tied her to him. Fear of Jasper's rage and what revenge he might seek. Fear of a whole town watching her every move and whispering about the bride who chose the wrong Cole. Fear of a future she couldn't predict or control. As she lay awake that night, listening to the wind whisper through the cottonwoods like voices from another world, she realized something that made her chest tighten. She had escaped one cage, but she might have stepped into another, and she had no idea what Jonah Cole would expect of her, now that the dust had settled and the town's eyes had turned away. The next morning, the ranch felt quiet, too quiet after the chaos of the day before. Evelyn woke to the smell of coffee and the soft clatter of Jonah moving around the kitchen. He didn't knock on her door. He didn't call for her. He simply let her come out when she was ready, giving her the gift of her own timing. When she stepped into the main room, smoothing her wrinkled dress and trying to tame her sleep-tangled hair, Jonah looked up from the stove. "You sleep all right?" he asked. His voice was neutral, careful. She nodded. It was half true. She had slept in fits and starts, waking at every unfamiliar sound, every creak of the house settling. He poured her a cup of coffee and set it on the rough wooden table between them. They sat across from each other in silence, two strangers tied together, by one chaotic moment on a train platform. The coffee was strong and bitter, but Evelyn drank it gratefully. Finally, Jonah spoke again. "I want to be clear about how things will be," he said. "You have your own room. I won't touch you. I won't ask anything of you that you don't want to give. This place can be yours for as long as you need it, whether that's forever or until you figure out somewhere else you'd rather be." Evelyn felt something warm settle in her chest. Safety, respect, things she had never been given before, things she had stopped believing she deserved. Over the following days, Jonah taught her how the ranch worked, how to feed the chickens that scattered across the yard like nervous thoughts, how to gather eggs without startling the hens, how to sweep the porch and keep the dust from creeping into every corner of the house. He didn't command like a man issuing orders to a servant. He showed her once, patiently, explaining the reasons behind each task. Then, he let her work at her own pace, never criticizing her mistakes. And he taught her how to ride. Willow, the beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze on her forehead, became her companion. The horse was gentle but spirited, patient with Evelyn's inexperience. Jonah's voice was calm and low as he walked beside them in the corral, guiding without controlling. "Look up, Evelyn. Horses follow your eyes. They can feel where you want to go. Sit straight in the saddle. Trust her. She'll trust you back." She tried. She failed. She slid off the saddle twice, landing hard in the dust, while Willow looked down at her with what seemed like equine amusement. But Jonah never laughed at her. He never grew annoyed or impatient. He simply offered his hand to help her up and encouraged her to try again. His patience made her brave. Something gentle and steady began growing between them as the weeks passed. Not romance, not yet, but something like trust, something like partnership, something that felt like the foundation of a house that might one day become a home. But Dust Creek had not forgotten the scene at the train station. The gossip had spread to every corner of the territory like wildfire through dry brush, and neither had Jasper Cole forgotten the humiliation of being rejected in front of the whole town. A few weeks later, when Jonah and Evelyn rode into town for supplies, every eye followed them down the main street. Whispers floated on the wind like dust motes. "That's the girl, claimed by mistake. She's living at his ranch now, alone with him. Scandalous, improper. Jonah ignore." Ed the looks with the practiced ease of a man who had stopped caring about opinions long ago. But Evelyn felt every one of them like a thorn pressing into her skin. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, but her hands trembled as she gathered flour and salt and thread from the shelves of the general store. She tried to leave quickly, but laughter from the saloon porch froze her in her tracks. Jasper stood there with his arm in a sling, his face twisted with rage and wounded pride. His friends surrounded him like a pack of mangy dogs. "There she is," one of them sneered loudly. "Only 18, sent west to marry a cowboy, and the wrong one grabbed her. What kind of woman lets that happen?" Heat rushed to her face. Shame, anger, fear, they all tangled together until she couldn't tell them apart. Jonah appeared beside her, quiet as a shadow despite his size. His eyes were sharp as flint as he assessed the threat. He took her basket from her frozen hands and guided her firmly back toward the wagon. "Get in," he said softly. His voice was calm, but she could feel the tension coiled in his body like a spring ready to release. She obeyed, climbing up onto the wagon seat while her heart hammered against her ribs. But before Jonah could join her, 2 men approached to block his path. Silas Penn, the pawnshop owner with his oily smile and calculating eyes, and Deputy Abel Knox, badge gleaming on his chest like a warning. Silas smiled like a snake about to strike. "Jonah, just reminding you that your land note comes due soon. Hope you're making plans to pay it. Would hate to see this fine ranch fall into the wrong hands." Jonah's jaw clenched tight. "The note will be paid." Deputy Knox tipped his hat with mock politeness. "Heard some talk about your sudden marriage. Might need to look into it officially. Make sure everything is proper and legal." Jonah didn't blink. Everything is proper. He flicked the reins and drove away, but the ride home was heavy with unspoken worry. The threats were louder now, no longer whispered behind hands but spoken openly, boldly, like circling predators sensing weakness. When they reached the ranch, Evelyn finally asked the question that had been burning inside her since that first day. "Jonah, did you really mean to claim me that day at the station?" He didn't answer right away. He tied the horse to the post with careful attention. He wiped dust from his weathered hands. He looked toward the cottonwood trees as if searching for the right words among their swaying branches. "I meant to protect you," he said quietly at last. "That's all I knew in that moment. That you needed help and I could give it. But what about now?" she whispered. He turned to her then, his gray eyes soft but full of conflict. "Now I don't know what's right anymore. We need the truth from your aunt. We need that original telegraph to prove which J. Cole was meant to marry you." So they saddled up early the next morning to ride to the telegraph office in the next town, hoping to find answers that would settle everything once and for all. The sky was clear but strange. The air felt heavy and wrong. The horizon was painted with a faint yellow haze that made Jonah's expression darken with worry. "We ride fast," he said. They set out across the open range, pushing the horses harder than usual. The wind grew eerily still. The birds fell silent. Even the insects stopped their constant chorus. Then Jonah stopped his horse suddenly and cursed under his breath. Dust storm coming. A wall of brown rolled across the land toward them like a giant wave made of earth instead of water. It swallowed the horizon whole. "Evelyn, stay close to me. Whatever happens, stay close." But before they could run for shelter, the storm slammed into them with terrifying force. The wind howled like a living creature in agony. Dust filled Evelyn's eyes and mouth and lungs. She fought desperately to hold onto Willow's reins as the horse panicked beneath her. "Jonah!" she screamed into the chaos. But a stampede of panicked cattle surged between them, a thundering wall of hooves and horns and wild-eyed terror. In an instant, they were separated. Evelyn was alone in a storm that could kill. Terror burned through her, but then something else rose up to meet it. Determination. She remembered everything Jonah had taught her during those patient days on the ranch. Find shelter. Stay put. Stay alive. She forced Willow toward a rocky rise she had glimpsed before the storm hit. She threw herself behind a jutting stone and pressed her body into the small shelter it offered. She wet a cloth from her canteen and tied it over her mouth and nose to filter the choking dust. The storm raged on, but Evelyn was no longer a helpless girl waiting to be rescued. She was a survivor. She found the packet of tallow Jonah had made her carry, insisting it might save her life someday. She built a tiny signal fire in the lee of the rocks, shielding the fragile flame from the murderous wind. The greasy smoke rose in a dark, thick column, visible even through the swirling dust. Miles away, fighting through the storm on sheer willpower, Jonah smelled something strange. Smoke. Not the smoke of destruction, but the purposeful smoke of a signal fire. He turned brimstone toward it and pushed forward, his heart pounding harder than the storm. When he finally saw the flicker of her fire through the chaos, something inside him broke open. Fear and relief and love all tangled together until he couldn't separate them anymore. He found her curled behind the rocks, shaking and exhausted but alive. Gloriously, miraculously alive. He dropped to his knees beside her, led her into his arms, and held her with a force he didn't know he possessed. "I knew you'd come," she whispered against his chest. "I told you I'd teach you to survive," he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't hide anymore. "You saved yourself, Evelyn. I just followed your signal." For the first time, Jonah Cole pressed his forehead to hers, breathing hard, holding the only person in the world he realized he could not bear to lose. The storm still raged around them, but in that moment of connection, neither of them felt it at all.